Hello everyone and welcome back to The Games Must Go On, a series where I recap all of my horrible ideas. And today we're taking a look at Super Smash Bros. Ultimate without spirits and without the skill tree. So without further ado, let's go. The rules are simple. We just have to go ahead and beat World of Light without using spirits or the skill tree in battle. We are, however, allowed to use spirits on the world map. Now with that being said, let's get right into this run. Actually, I should probably mention something first. That being, I'm not the best Smash Ultimate player. This is mostly because my only previous experience with the series had been a few hours in Smash 4, and I started this series right when Smash Ultimate came out, so please forgive me for not being the best. And with that being said, I'm going to start the run on easy mode. But with that being said, now let's jump right into this run. Our first fight is up against the Smoky Prog, who actually goes down pretty easily. But now I should probably mention something. That being, a lot of the fights do. A lot of the fights are pretty easy, or there just isn't a lot to talk about. And considering that we have over 300 fights to go through, I'm going to go ahead and mostly be skimming through these fights. And mostly saving the time for the interesting fights. So with that all out of the way, let's continue. After taking down the Smoky Prog, we can actually fight Eevee and then Celeste before we come to Mario. Now, Mario is actually a figure fighter, which means after we defeat him, he joins our party, which is really great. But even better, his fight actually is really good, because, well, there's absolutely nothing. It's just a regular fight against Mario. And every single figure fighter is actually this way, which is amazing because that basically means it's a free win. But with that out of the way, we can go ahead and continue on to Guardian. The only real problem with the Guardian is that he doesn't take any knockback, which is kind of annoying, but with a lucky item drop I was able to take him down. After that we have Sheik, who's another figure fighter, but because, figure fighters are really easy, this makes it a complete cakewalk. Then we have Metal Sonic, Rabbid Mario, and Dr. Sagor, who was actually kind of unlucky with the items, but overall, the fight wasn't that bad. After that we have Matar, and then we have Shinobu, which is the first case of modifiers. Now, some of you might be wondering what a modifier is, but before I get into that, I should probably explain how Smash Ultimate works, and that's because, well, it's a fighting game. You and your enemy are both taking constant damage from each other, and the person who does more damage, well, the more skilled player normally wins. Now, this is great and all, but how do you make a CPU do this? Well, the obvious answer is just increase its AI level. The only problem with that is, well, I'm on easy mode, so if you do that, then the people, playing the game intentionally will have a way harder time of doing this. Well, then why don't you go ahead and just give the spirit a higher sort of bonus? Give it something like a weapon to start off with. Well, that's great and all, but we have the same thing with our spirit team. So how do we ensure the player's skill goes up? And that's where modifiers come in. Because modifiers are essentially artificial, difficulty increasers. Artificially increasing the enemy's attack power and defense, which makes these fights extremely more difficult. Because while normally your attack might do, 20 damage, now it can do as low as 5 damage, which is a pretty significant difference, making some fights a lot harder. And I would say that this fight is probably one of the first cases where this appears. The reason I say this is because this fight includes bullet bills, which severely increase attack power. Unfortunately, only for the enemy. Our attack power is pretty weak, while the enemy can kill us at 0 just with a couple of bullet bills. Clearly it's an uphill battle, so how in the world are we ever going to take them out? Well, we don't have to. The bullet bill can actually make your opponents SD, which is exactly what we do here, which thankfully lets us pass. And then we can go ahead and move on to Balloon Fighter, Board and Cord and Barst, Yellow Wallylog, and Heracross, where we actually see our first stage effect. This time it's only sticky stage, but this could be a lot worse. Well, at least this one's only sticky stage, and we can go ahead and move on. After Heracross, we have it easy for a while, where we can go ahead and take down Perry, Yoshi, Aline, Joan, Dreambird, Honey Queen, Nick, Marin, Slowpoke, Panther Caroso, Nina, Fox, Coraline, Shoutix, Freezy, Rock Mario, Bokoblin, Shy Guy, Buzzbuzz, Model X, Monita, Wii Fit Trainer, and Psyduck before we get to Bomberman. Now, Bomberman is actually somewhat difficult because we're fighting both Toon Link and Bomberman at the same time, which means the stage quickly becomes covered in explosives. And fun fact, we're actually weak to explosives in this fight, because normal people aren't weak to explosives. Now, this means we die very quickly, and I was only able to beat the level with a final smash that I got really lucky with. Nevertheless, I did beat the level, meaning we were able to move on to the next one. Our next fights include Soren, Keapora Geabora, Duster, Shed Ninja, Tiki Tak Tribe, Toadette, which was actually somewhat difficult with a Toad Me fighter assisting her. Thankfully he SD'd off stage. The Swooping Snitchbug, Ashley Robbins, Russ, Ashnard, Gengar, Wiggler, the girl from Hajimari no Mori, before we finally arrive with Dr. Light. Now, Dr. Light would be pretty tough, mostly because of a Mega Man that defends Dr. Mario, but we have a new weapon that I need to explain, that being Kirby Cheese. That's because Kirby's neutral B is Inhale, and by inhaling a player off stage and then spitting them out underneath the stage, it's pretty much impossible for them to get back. But this only works on certain stages, and on certain characters. Thankfully, Dr. Mario is one of them, so we're able to abuse it right here. So just keep that in mind for future levels. Our next fight is up against Stadine, who, while isn't particularly difficult, it does feature our first encounter with a zapped floor, which basically means the floor is electric. Now normally you would use a electric spirit to prevent this from having any effect, but for obvious reasons we can't do that. But hey, at least this stage provides us with platforms to stand on. So it's not that bad, and we're able to go ahead and quickly take out Elecman and Susie, who, while is a little bit difficult because of the Meta Knight, I was able to get lucky with a Beam Sword, and then we're able to go ahead and take down Pichu, before we finally arrive at the Great Zapfish. Welcome to Pain. The Great Zapfish features 3 major modifications. For one, the floor is electric with no platforms to stand on. The enemy is also giant, and there's of course heavy modifiers. These all combined mean our runs normally take place with us getting stunned from the electricity and then dying one hit to Pikachu. And this is a pretty much required battle, so we have no choice except to take him down. But what could we ever do against this formidable foe? The answer is not in fact fighting fair. You might immediately think of Kirby Cheese, but that doesn't work because Pikachu is giant and you can't inhale giant enemies. Instead, we're going to have to rely on Kirby's Down B. That's because when you use Down B and you hit the zap floor, the zap only damages Kirby's stone, which means he doesn't actually take damage. And by repeatedly using Down B, you can last forever on the stage. But we're not fighting the stage, we're fighting Pikachu, meaning we also have to deal damage to him. And just using Down B isn't going to cut it. For one, the move will stale, and 2, it's easily counterable by Pikachu, and one counter can send us flying. Instead, we're also going to have to switch this up with Side B. But inevitably, I was eventually able to get a perfect run, where I eventually even got a final smash, which barely let me, beat the round, and we were able to move on, past the power plant. After that absolute monstrosity of a fight, we have it easy for a little bit, being able to take down Cyrus and Reese, Duck Hunt, the Chorus Kids, Piston Hondo, Top Man, Muddy Mole, Venusaur, Morag, Squitter, Slashman, Donkey Kong, Red Pikmin, Deku Link, Ricky, Andy, Sigma, Mega Man, Primid, Parasite Queen, Porygon, Bomb Man, before we finally arrive at Duon, who only has one major problem, that being really strong projectiles, although these can be reflected with Fox's Shine being used against them. After that, we can easily defeat Revolver Ocelot from Metal Gear Solid 3, and then we arrive at Gallium, our first real boss. Before I get into Gallium, I should probably explain how Smash Ultimate bosses work, because they actually fall on a sort of spectrum. Not necessarily in difficulty, but on type of AI, because Smash Ultimate bosses actually fall between a traditional boss and an actual fighter boss. Now, a traditional boss is simple. It's where the boss is really strong, but after its attacks, it also leaves opportunity to counterattack. So it basically becomes a sense of survival. The other type of boss, fighter bosses, instead of acting like a traditional boss, they actually act like, well, a fighter. That means you're going to be dealing damage to them, and they're going to be doing attacks to deal damage to you in rapid succession, and the more skilled player, or CPU in this case, wins. Now, fighter bosses, because of how many modifiers are obviously in place to make it, challenging, are definitely going to be more difficult. Although, this doesn't mean Gallium, who is a traditional boss, is a complete pushover. That's because he still has a pretty strong attack set, able to do over 90% in some attacks. So we still have to be on our toes, but after about an hour of attempts, I was able to take him down, concluding our first boss and allowing us to proceed. After that, we can go ahead and fight Marth, Villager, Trombone, and Octoling before we get to Yarn Yoshi, who has one very small problem, that being we take too much knockback to fight normally. But who said we had to fight normally? By jumping to the right cloud, we can make it disappear while subsequently luring the Yoshis over to said cloud. And by the time they reach, they have no more jumps left, and the cloud's already disappeared. We make our way back to the mainland, and let the Yoshis fall to their doom, making this fight thankfully possible. After that, we can go ahead and take down Flygon, Fei Long, Boom Boom, Mecha Koopa, Shadow Man, Twin Bellows, Just Belmont, Kamek, Groudon, Aisha, and Lion, before we get to our second boss of the run, Giga Bowser. While Gallium was a complete traditional boss, Giga Bowser is the exact opposite, that being a full-on fighter boss, meaning we're essentially fighting a Bowser AI that hasn't realized his own strength. Not to mention that every attack that he does also covers a large portion of the stage. Take his neutral B for instance, which is fire all the way halfway across the stage, basically leaving you nowhere to stand on. Attacks like these are what makes this fight so difficult, and we basically have to rely on luck in order to not get completely destroyed at the very beginning. Nevertheless, with said luck, we eventually were able to take down Giga Bowser and move on. Our next fights are pretty easy, those being against Valu, Goomba, Nehru, Longku, Simon, Affinity, Heracles, Moblin, Farja, Pit, Lloyd, Lucario, Pico, Sov, Samus, Orbulon, Bubbles, and Sidestepper. But then we cross Nikki, who is pretty annoying, mostly because the assist trophy, while not that bad, does bring along free Mii fighters, who are surprisingly difficult. But thankfully I got lucky with Kirby Cheese for all 3 of them, and only after an hour I was able to take her down. After that, we can go ahead and take down Mr. Game & Watch, Eddie, Critter, Cranky Kong, Zinger, and On Guard before we get to Funky Kong, who has 3 major problems. For one, all 3 enemies have major modifiers. As well as for number 2, of course there are bullet bills literally everywhere for these enemies to grab. And for number 3, the stage is our enemy. Now this is because the stage is semi-transparent, meaning we can't just use Kirby Cheese because the players can just jump right through it. Also, the stage is not a walk-off stage, meaning we can't just cheese the bullet bills like normal. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to try. Now, the stage has relatively small blast zones, but even still, because we're not on the edge, it's almost impossible to get them to launch off. But almost is not impossible. Now, if we go ahead and fall off the stage, we can lure the players to the edge. Then by grabbing ledge and then falling down or jumping up, we can force them to use their bullet bills in just the right spot to launch them into the blast zone. This, however, is a very precise trick, which might work once, but for free characters, it's almost never going to work. But that is still almost, meaning after a long time, I was finally able to kill this Funky Kong and we can move on to the rest of the game. We can start off by taking down Candy Kong, Diddy Kong, and Bullet Bill, which, while similar to Funky Kong with more Bullet Bills and more fighters, it's easily cheesed with walk-offs. We can go ahead and take down the Grim Leecher, Blooper, Urban Champion Fighters, Quadon Cheerleaders, Lapras, Fishman, Cream and Cheese, Ryota and Hayami, Tapu Koko, Rick, Brontu Burt, Tricky, Garchomp, Molly, Ramblin' Evil Mushroom, Taurus, and Melia before we get to Rathalos. Even though he's a traditional boss, Rathalos is not a complete pushover. That's because he still has decent power and an incredible speed stat, which means whenever you attack, he'll likely counterattack. But he does have one glaring weakness, that being he pretty much only attacks in front of him. Which means if you go ahead and get behind him, you're likely safe. But remember, he can always turn around and attack very quickly, so don't do any charge attacks that will take too long. But nevertheless, with this weakness exposed, and a lot of damage taken, we can take down Rathalos and move on. Our next fights are all pretty easy, being able to take down Akari Hayami, Absol, Condor, Metal Gear Ray, Jury, Nika Fire, Gyrowing, Lip, Almond Celesta Young, Dungeon Man, Geodude, before coming to Walhart, which actually has a lot of attack power and is hard to avoid, but we can cheese him with a walk-off. We then fight Cammy and Medusa, who is powerful and then even becomes giant, but that's her downfall as we can spam up tilt to cheese her. We can then take down Squawks, Daruk, James McCloud, Volcanion, Prince Peasley, Centurion, and the Odyssey before we arrive at Rivali. Welcome everyone to Mario Bros. 2 because this level has wind and an absolute ton of it. Basically, if you fall off, congratulations, you're dead in every single sense of the word because you physically cannot recover. This means staying on stage is crucial and you can only use basically 2 moves while staying on said stage. That being Kirby's Hammer and Kirby's Dash Attack. Make sure to interchange these moves in order not to stale, but by spamming these, eventually Ravioli goes down without much problem. After that, we can go ahead and decimate Superstar before finally getting the Master Hand. While Master Hand does have some pretty crazy attacks, they're all telegraphed, meaning once you actually learn what they are, it's pretty easy to avoid and we can take down Master Hand in only a few attempts. Now the same can't be said about Galeem. The problem with Galeem isn't that he does more damage. Now while it is true that he does dish out more damage than a traditional boss, his attacks are telegraphed and can be dodged the same way. The real problem is how much more health he has. This makes it so the fight is dragged on for several minutes, where one attack and you're basically dead. So you have to play, not perfectly, but pretty well for a long time, which can prove to be a little bit tricky. But nevertheless, he goes down the same as everyone else, and we're able to move on to the Dark World. Our journey begins here by taking down Chaos and Jen, before we get stopped by Crazy Hand. But he goes down just as easily as Master Hand, and that is to say, he goes down really easily for a boss standard. After that, we can go ahead and take down Octoling Girl and Octoling Boy, Landmaster, and Mega Man Volnut, who actually was somewhat difficult because it's free enemies and it's a timed battle. But the fight is easily cheesed with the walk-offs. After that, we can go ahead and take down Kraid, Yuga, the Imprisoned, Navarre, Caitlyn and Caddy, Mr. L, Woodman, and Crom, before we get to Tiny Kong, who has the major problem of high winds again. Not to mention that this is a time battle, so just using Kirby wasn't gonna work. Instead, I decided to go with Bowser and his extremely strong smash attacks to do enough damage, and it thankfully worked, allowing us to move on. Our next fights include Saria, Skull Kid, Young Link, Bulborb, Landia, Sonic, Hilda, Jacob, Malin, Magical Vacation Protagonist, Donbei and Hakira, Impa, Zale, Uxie, Mispirit, and Azelf, which actually was really difficult because all the attacks do 46% and there are free Mewtwo's. My solution, stay on ledge and let them just SD or use Kirby Cheese. After that, we can take down Zelda, Cloud, Tefu, Chozo Statue, Dragonite, Urbosa, Tack, Camus, T-Rex, Fortitudo, Elena, and Vaddie. Unfortunately, Vaddie wasn't going down without a fight, and that's actually because of all the wind in the stage. For one, you have strong winds that blow right, then left, then permanently to the right. Not to mention, Ridley starts with an Ore Club, and the tornado appears on Hyrule Castle. My solution, when the wind is blowing left, use Bowser and get over to the left side. Then the wind should start blowing right, and now you're in a perfect position. Whenever Ridley gets close, use up smash and you should be able to trap him in an endless cycle. With enough damage, you'll be able to end him, and there we go, we're able to finally get to Ganondorf, who goes down easily. Then we're able to follow up with Calamity Ganon before we get to the boss of a section. The boss is of course Ganon, and this comes with 4 problems. For one, he does an absolute ton of damage, each attack can send you flying. The second problem is you can only damage him by hitting his tail, which means you have to actually jump over the boss whenever you want to attack. For free, he can turn around very quickly, meaning even if you're attacking him, you're not safe, because he can just switch around and do a ton of damage right while you're at the blast zone. And for 4, this boss has an absolute ton of health. Just like Galeem, this makes the fight go on for a really long time and makes the boss incredibly difficult to take down. Difficult doesn't mean impossible though. By using Mega Man, he has the best double jump. That's because it's quick and it gets you just the right height over Ganon without being so high that it takes 4 years to actually get back down. With this and his very powerful up smash, I was able to do quite a bit of damage to Ganon. This doesn't mean it was easy though, because he could often just switch around and still attack, which makes this very difficult. Nevertheless, after hours of attempts, I was able to take Ganon down and we were able to move on. Now that we finished the first path, we can move on to the second, starting off with Darknut, Axel, Darkrai, Crazy Hand a second time, Amy, Poirot, Frog and Snake, Vince, Karate Joe, Winged Pikmin, Poe, Tora, Zant, Greninja, and Andros from Star Fox 64, who actually was a little bit of trouble, mostly because he had some really heavy modifiers to both Ganondorf and the assist trophy. I was only able to beat it because I got lucky with attacks and a final smash. But after that, we were able to take down Wolf, Raymond Bryce, Off the Hook, Lisa, Ike, and Meta Knight, who was actually the most difficult figure fighter. Then we can go ahead and take down Lakitu and Spiny before we get to Taboo. Now Taboo's actually somewhat of a problem. That's because it's a giant metal Bayonetta and we take massive damage over time. This means we can't fight fair, but also we can't use Kirby Cheese because, well, it's a giant opponent. My solution? Donkey Kong. That's because Donkey Kong has a special throw where if he goes ahead and grabs an opponent, you can actually move them around. Now, if we go ahead and carry them off ledge, we could throw them, but that gives them a jump back. Instead, we want them to actually mash out before letting them fall to their death, because when they mash out, they actually run out of jumps, and then we're still able to use our up B, which means we can air stall while watching them fall to their doom. And with that, we were able to defeat Taboo, and now we're off to the boss. Marx is surprisingly one of the easiest bosses in this entire game, even compared to something like Master Hand and Crazy Hand. That's because all of his moves are telegraphed to the extreme. Once you learn the timing, you can easily take him out. Now, this does require a good character with a lot of jumps, which Kirby is perfect for. But with that, he's really not the biggest threat, so we can go ahead and move on. But with that, we can move on to the third and final path, that being the one with Gomorrah, Crazy Hand a third time, Krako, Loki, Ampharos, Quickman, Grey Fox, Redead, Houndoom, Nightman, Medusa Head, Inspired, Skullman, Mummy, Zora, Alan, Maria Renard, The Creature and Fleaman, Drog, Death, Leon Belmont, Happy Mask Salesman, Alucard, before we get to the hardest boss in the game, Dracula. This boss is a problem mostly because of one reason, that being, he has 2 phases. Which, among having double health, it also means we can't just use one strategy throughout, because halfway through, he of course turns into a completely different monster. This requires us to have a character that's good at both phases. My option was Simon. That's because Simon has an axe attack that goes ahead and actually able to hit Dracula on his first phase, as well as very good projectiles for his second phase. That's because in his second phase, Dracula likes to jump around an absolute ton and likes to spit out a lot of projectiles, so we need to be far away from him. Simon's projectiles allows him to actually attack from a distance, which keeps him safe. This isn't perfect though, because Dracula, as I said, does like to jump around a lot. Not to mention, his attacks are extremely quick, so you always have to be on your toes. Nevertheless, after about 7 hours of attempts, I was able to take him down and we were able to move on to Darkon. While Darkon may be the boss of this world, he is nowhere as difficult as Dracula was. All of his attacks are way slower and do a little bit less damage. Now that doesn't mean he's a complete pushover, but it just means that after we learn his attacks, he becomes a lot easier than anything Dracula could have shown us. And with that, we're able to beat him and we're able to move on to the last section. We can start this section off by taking down Midna and Mumkar before we get stopped by Tetra because of high winds and items, but thankfully Toon Link got Steed with a bullet bill. After that, we can take down Dark Mind, which was almost impossible because Ganondorf has extreme power and Curry Breath, but he eventually accidentally command grabbed me off stage, which was an almost instant death. We can then go ahead and take down Magnus, Baldur, General Pepper, Seliph, Tails, Yarnpuchi before we get stopped by Axe, who is actually hard to launch but not hard to DK cheese. After that, we can take down Starly and Shanoa, who actually has heavy winds, but I finally learned that DK's up B has immunity to wind boxes. Our next fights include Dark Samus, Crazy Hand a 4th time, Solgaleo, Mifra, Palutena, 00 Busters, Thanatos, Rogue the Bat, Master Hand a 2nd time, Little Birdie, Jean, Nash, Mother Brain, Garen, Ball, Madama Butterfly, Bowser Wedding, before we get stopped by Claus, who actually is 2 extremely difficult Lucases, but not powerful enough to stop Kirby Cheese. Unfortunately, the next fight isn't so lucky. The fight in question is up against Isaac. That's because we're both fighting the assist trophy and 4 other enemies. And the real problem is the assist trophy. That's because Isaac spams out moves that cover almost the entire stage, which is a problem because he doesn't disappear, so we can't just wait him out. Instead, I had to go ahead and manipulate him to teleport to the right, and then I had to go to the left side in order to evade his actual attacks. From there, it's just a matter of abusing a walk-off to get rid of the 4 enemies. This wasn't easy, but it was doable. But after enough attempts, I was eventually able to complete it, and we were able to move on. We can then take down Roy and Master Hand a 3rd time before we get stuck on Lunala. That's because Ridley and the Pokemon both do massive damage. My only recommendation, play extremely defensively and don't get hit. With enough attempts, I eventually was able to take down this fight, but it wasn't easy. But eventually, I did do it, so we were able to move on. With that last fight out of the way, that was almost the last roadblock. After that, we can go ahead and take down Fierce Steedy Link, which could have been trouble, but thankfully he has Steed. We can take down Bayonetta, Crazy Hand a 5th time, Mipha, Baby Mario, Eve, Young Samus, Chibi Robo, and then finally the figure player Mob, which with Master Hand it really isn't changed. And with that, we finally made it to the final boss. This boss is not like any other. It's actually divided into 3 sections. The first one being a vertical climb, but the second one being our downfall. This is because we're up against a boss rush. All 6 bosses against 3 lives of ours. And considering I could only beat 1 boss per life before, and that was even on the best of circumstances, this is basically impossible for me. Even after hours of attempts, I was only able to kill 2 bosses with all these lives. Which means, unfortunately, no, I cannot beat Super Smash Bros. Ultimate without spirits and without the skill tree on easy difficulty. And then Hero was released. That's right, a completely new character was our key to success. And by that I mean I completely threw him in the trash the moment I saw him, and instead looked at the more important part of the update. That's right, a new mode was added to World of Light, and not a very difficult one like everyone wanted, instead a very easy one. One that actually made the bosses, instead of killing you in 1 hit, kill you in about 5. And after that, it was time to go back to grinding attempts. And after a little while, I made it through the first phase, through the second phase, and finally took down the final boss once and for all. And with that, I can say that it is indeed possible to beat Super Smash Bros. Ultimate without spirits and without the skill tree. Just don't ask me for 100%. And with that, I'd like to say thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.